It started with a tomato, but it's become so much more. On July 14, 2025, with no fanfare or warning, the US government dropped a 17% tariff on every tomato crossing the border from Mexico. No speeches, no debates, just a quiet policy shift that hit like a sledgehammer. Overnight, 90% of America's fresh tomatoes, worth over $3 billion annually, became a political pawn. Within weeks, grocery stores felt the shock. In Raleigh, North Carolina, prices spiked over 40%, a pound of beefsteak tomatoes jumping from $2.99 to $4.35. In Los Angeles, Roma tomatoes, once a steal under $1, climbed past $3.80 sign. A mother in a supermarket aisle picked up a tomato, hesitated, and put it back. Salsa vanished from diner menus. School lunch trays lost their splash of red. Across the country, people stared at their grocery receipts and asked the same question, what just happened? This wasn't about farming or fairness. It was a message, a line drawn in the dirt, and the tomato was just the messenger. For years, a trade agreement with Mexico kept things steady. The 2019 tomato suspension deal was like a well-oiled machine, smoothing out disputes and keeping prices predictable. It ensured that the U.S. got its tomatoes, 90% of them from Mexico, while farmers on both sides of the border thrived. But on that July day, Washington pulled the plug. No negotiations, no transition plan, just a press release announcing the tariff. Tomatoes already loaded on trucks, rolling toward the border, were hit with the 17% tax the second they crossed. Importers were blindsided. Economists called it a reckless gamble. Grocers warned of a crisis. In just 2 months, prices in major cities surged 30 to 45% for families already stretching their budgets. This wasn't just inflation, it was a gut punch. School cafeterias swapped fresh tomatoes for canned paste. Fast food joints ditched fresh salsa. In suburban kitchens, a single tomato was stretched across multiple meals. A quiet sacrifice that spoke louder than any headline. The fallout didn't stop at the grocery aisle. In Florida, small Latino-owned import businesses, built on decades of cross-border trade, started collapsing. Warehouses closed, drivers were laid off, and farm liaisons who'd spent years connecting Mexican fields to U.S. tables were suddenly out of work. A July 2025 report warned that the tomato supply chain's collapse could drag down packaging, refrigeration, and transport industries, threatening small logistics firms and pushing food prices even higher. Washington's excuse? Protect American farmers. But who exactly? Florida's tomato farms only run part of the year. States like New York and Minnesota rely almost entirely on Mexican imports. California's production, crippled by drought and labor shortages, can't fill the gap. So, was this really about farmers, or was it politics dressed up as policy? While the U.S. made noise, Mexico made moves. No fiery speeches, no threats, just a quiet, calculated pivot. In 3 months, they built a new trade route that sidestepped the U.S. entirely. Trains now roll out of Sinaloa, Mexico's agricultural heart, through Chihuahua, and straight into Canada's Ontario and Quebec. No U.S. border checks, no tariffs, just refrigerated rail cars keeping tomatoes at a crisp 1°C across 2,000 kilometers. It's a logistical marvel, cutting transport costs by 15% compared to trucking through the U.S. and adding days to shelf life. Canada's biggest grocers, Loblaws, Metro, Sobeys, didn't just take notice, they signed 5-year contracts. Mexico didn't fight the tariff, they outsmarted it, and in doing so, they didn't just move tomatoes, they moved trust. Canadian ports in Montreal and Toronto are now hubs for Mexican produce, while U.S. ports in California and Arizona see dwindling traffic. Mexico's not coming back, and Canada's not complaining. This shift stings because it's not just about produce, it's about loyalty. Buyers who once routed tomatoes through Texas are now investing in Canadian infrastructure. A Bloomberg Green report projects that by 2026, nearly half of Mexico's tomato exports will go to Canada, up from less than 1% 2 years ago. It's not just tomatoes either. Avocados, strawberries, bell peppers are all flowing north, bypassing the U.S. entirely. Canada's grocers didn't send diplomats. They sent executives to Mexican farms, tasting produce and signing deals through 2030. A Metro logistics director put it plainly, "We don't bet on election cycles." That's the kind of stability Mexico craved, and Canada delivered. Meanwhile, U.S. importers are closing warehouses. In McAllen, Texas, one distributor laid off 74 workers in June. Across the border in Windsor, Ontario, a new cold storage facility is fully booked through 2026. The tariff didn't just tax tomatoes. It taxed America's place in global trade. For ordinary Americans, the cost is personal. Maria, a single mom in New Jersey, used to buy tomatoes every Sunday. Now, at $4 a pound, she reaches for canned beans instead. Her 5-year-old doesn't notice, but the shift from fresh to processed carries a weight she feels. In Laredo, Texas, Tom, a retired welder on Social Security, walks past the produce aisle, calling it a luxury store. In Detroit, the Wilson family, reliant on SNAP benefits, hasn't had a fresh salad in weeks. Schools in Illinois swapped tomato wedges for shredded lettuce, and kids noticed the missing color. This isn't just about price, it's about dignity, health, and the quiet erosion of what it means to eat well. A tomato isn't just a fruit anymore. It's a symbol of a policy that landed not in boardrooms, but in lunchboxes and pantries. The tariff was aimed at Mexico, but it hit American kitchens hardest. The tremor didn't stop at the border. By late July, logistics firms in Europe started rerouting produce from Brazil to Portugal, bypassing U.S. ports. Why deal with the chaos? A Dutch supplier asked. Colombia and Peru followed, shifting exports to Canadian ports like Vancouver and Halifax. Even East Asia took notice. Delegates from Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan visited Mexico, not to talk trade, but to learn how to build supply chains that don't touch the U.S. A Korean advisor called Mexico a blueprint for resilience. Japanese and German firms are now eyeing Mexican electronics hubs as trade springboards, leveraging deals that exclude Washington. Canada, meanwhile, is playing smart, labeling Mexican tomatoes as product of Canada under USMCA rules, legal, seamless, and untouchable. A Canadian official summed it up. If the U.S. wants chaos, we'll offer certainty. This isn't just about agriculture, it's a warning. European analysts are already talking about a strategic relocation away from U.S.-centric trade. Autos, semiconductors, biotech, they could be next. The world isn't boycotting America, it's sidestepping it, quietly and permanently. Today, it's tomatoes. Tomorrow, it could be microchips or medicine. Mexico didn't storm out. They planned their exit with precision. Canada didn't push. They opened the door. And American consumers? They're left, paying more for less, wondering if this is what protecting farmers looks like. The tariff was sold as a shield for American agriculture, but it's become a tax on every dinner table, every grocery run, every choice to eat fresh instead of processed. The numbers paint a stark picture. By July 2025, U.S. tomato prices jumped 22% at wholesale, with some retailers reporting 60% spikes on premium varieties. Canada, meanwhile, enjoys 8% cheaper costs thanks to streamlined rail routes. Small businesses are folding, workers are jobless, and families are cutting corners. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a policy that prioritized headlines over people. Critics argue it was meant to save farmers. But with climate issues, water shortages, and labor crunches, American farms can't fill the void. The real cost isn't just dollars, it's trust. When a tomato becomes a luxury, when a salad feels like a splurge, something bigger is breaking. Is this just a trade spat, or the start of America's unraveling as a global trade hub? The answer's not in Washington's press releases. It's in the empty produce aisles and the trains rolling north.